Now for your afternoon keynote. As the founder and chief visionary of Spark Vision and author of Permission to be Human, which you all should have gotten a copy of, MaryBeth Hyland knows that extraordinary success is rooted in the vision, values, and culture crafted by purpose-driven leaders and their tribe. With over a decade of experience built on knowledge from a BA in social work and MS in nonprofit management, she's known for her ability to guide individuals and teams to know, own, and live their values. And she does that with the understanding that we all have a deep desire to know and return to our most authentic selves at work, at home, and within. As a certified mediator, mindfulness instructor, and values expert, she engages audiences and teams all over the world with her authentic style of facilitation, coaching, and empowerment. Please join me in welcoming your afternoon keynote, MaryBeth Hyland.
All right, awesome. Well, it is such a gift to be here in person. This is only my second in-person keynote since the pandemic began. And so it's such a rewarding experience to feel like we're returning back to something that we were familiar with, but at the same time, we're returning back to something totally different. I heard recently, one of my clients actually sent me this article that was super fascinating, and it was talking about how the return to work right now was being likened to people in the military returning from active duty and going back into work and not knowing how to behave, not knowing what's right or what's wrong, how to engage. Do I shake your hand? Do I hug you? Do I take 6 steps backwards? And so it's a really interesting time where veterans often have a training in which how to integrate themselves back into the place of being a civilian. But we don't have that because we've never gone through that before. And so many of us are going through incredible struggles inside of ourselves that we're not sharing out loud with anyone else. And I know that you all have learned incredibly valuable information since you've been here today, for the folks that have been sharing online, for all of you here in person having your conversations, getting so much from the speakers. But I gotta tell you that none of this work is going to be sustainable for you or your organization if you don't give yourself permission to be human. And it's not until we give ourselves permission to be human that we can actually unconditionally give that to other people. Because what happens is we start to say, well, I could do that, why can't they do it? Right? In making judgments about what's okay and what's not okay, where people are on their journey. And this topic of permission to be human is so incredibly personal to me because at the age of 27, I was clinically diagnosed with a work addiction. And a lot of people use the term like workaholic as a playful kind of thing. And I'm here to tell you that I was diagnosed by a therapist because I literally did not know how to be when I wasn't working. It was the kind of experience where I would wake up usually around 5 o'clock to start my day. I would work before I'd make it into the office. I was running a lot of events. I was running a young professionals program at the time. I would work all day long, and then I'd either be hosting an event or attending somebody else's networking thing at night. I'd come home, I'd eat a little bit of food, I'd start working a little bit more, and then I'd pass out on the couch with my laptop on top of my chest. Then I'd wake up usually around 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, there's a lot of work to get done. And I'd start working some more. And that happened for years. And the reason that happened wasn't because I was in a culture in which that was asked of me. It was because I expected that of myself. I only gave myself permission to be perfect. Can anybody relate to that? It was never acceptable for me not to be in the front, getting all the awards, having the most members, raising the most money in the work that I was doing in the nonprofit sector before. And so it created this experience inside of myself that while everybody on the outside looking in thought, wow, she's really got it together. She's really achieving. That's so impressive. And I was perfectly comfortable allowing people to believe that's what it felt like on the inside. But what was going on inside of me was it was never good enough. I never felt like I was satiated by what I had achieved. And that all really stemmed from being a child of abuse and being told that I wasn't enough. And that story stuck with me as I went into my career. And that's what happens to us as human beings. The way that we show up at work, the way that we show up in life is always a reflection of what we think about ourselves. The way that we believe what we deserve or we don't deserve, whether we're enough or not enough. And while we may not articulate those things and people may not realize it, we know inside, right? We know inside. We know if we can sleep through the night or if we have to wake up in the middle of the night with racing thoughts of unworthiness and not enoughness. And that was my story for many, 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 many years. And I'm so grateful that there was one morning in which my husband, who at the time worked in finance, he would start his day around 5 o'clock, and he rolled over in bed and he said, "It's so good to see you." And I had no idea what he was talking about because he saw me all the time. He would come to the programs that I put on and he was very engaged in the work. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I'm typically already on my way to get things going when you've either passed out on the couch and you're kind of making your way up for the day, or you've already started your day and you may even be gone. So I just don't see you in the morning. It's just really nice to have you here." And it was from that place of love and compassion versus judgment and shame that I said, I have a problem. And I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do because the only thing I knew to stop those racing thoughts of not enoughness was to work more. So my remedy was killing me. It was killing me. And thankfully, it led me to get professional help. And I started to really address not only what could I do right now in slowing down my thoughts, in being able to let go of that never-ending, incessant gnawing to-do list, or those thoughts of unworthiness. And I went into a really, really deep practice of healing. Not only in learning how to heal myself in real time when I was having those triggering experiences, but also how to get to the root of all that trauma that I tried to pretend wasn't real from my childhood. I tried to pretend like I could just skip over that and that I would be able to figure it all out because I've done a pretty darn good job of it so far. And so this experience of giving myself permission to be human was absolutely what was required in order for me to ever not be somebody who was constantly in a spiral of feeling like I was unworthy. And the incredible gift of this work, you may have heard the expression, turn your mess into your message. Now I have this incredible privilege of working with wonderful leaders and organizations all over the world to help in being able to slow down, look at what's going on, and make new choices that are aligned with your values instead of violating those values. And most of us might say, oh yeah, I know what my values are. But very few of us have owned them and lived them. And so I'm incredibly grateful that you all have a copy of Permission to be Human because it literally is a step-by-step guide to teach you how to do that, starting with yourself, then expanding to your team, and then going to the organization at large. And so this is going to be a really beautiful time together as we close out the conference because we're going to start giving ourselves permission to be human right now. We're going to start that. The reason that I know this is so incredibly important is because we're all humans, right? And we know that this time has been so intense, so overwhelming, so much more than most any of us could handle. I'm literally a mindfulness instructor and I needed to get extra help regularly. So if you're human, you are not immune to the last 2.5 years. And this is what some of the most recent research is showing us, that 70% are saying that this is the most stressful time. And I've had somebody yell out before, and 30% are liars, right? And then we're seeing this incredible amount, right? 88% are saying they'd love to discuss this, right? They appreciate the opportunity to get real and talk about mental health. But less than half are actually doing it. We like to preach about how important things are, but we rarely create a sacred space and psychologically safe container to actually do that. And again, this all starts with ourselves, giving ourselves that permission to be human so that we can expand it out with intention to those around us. And the gift of this work is that while I primarily am working in organizations, this has a ripple effect. When you start to treat yourself better, when you start to prioritize your well-being, then other people start to feel like they have permission to do that too. They have permission to do that too. I can't tell you how many CEOs I've worked with where they say, we have this wellness room, but no one ever uses it. I don't understand. We invested all this money in this beautiful space, and the first couple weeks people started using it, and then it just kind of became a place where people were taking phone calls that they wanted to have. I hear some laughs, so maybe some folks can relate to this. And so my first question is always, when was the last time you used it? And then they'll look at me like, well, I don't need to use it. That's for everybody else. And so immediately you realize, well, do people feel like they have permission to use it? Do they feel like something's wrong with them if they use it? Do they feel like they're going to be labeled if they use it? So my first instruction is the executive team is to use that room at the highest traffic times of the day, where the most people are going to see them going in there. And you're actually going to take advantage of it, and then you're going to talk about what it did as a result of you using it. It's not rocket science, but yet so many of us are waiting for everybody else to get better before we invest in ourselves in that process. And I have this pledge. This is the Permission to Be Human pledge. It's in the introduction of the book. And this is what I have found are the areas within ourselves that we often need the most reminders. And much like as a kid growing up, where you may have put your hand on your heart and done the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning to the flag, this is something that I put my hand on my heart and I look in the mirror and I recite this pledge every morning. Because I have to be reminded, as the person who leads this work, I have to be reminded that I actually have permission to be human too. And if I didn't actively go through a process of reminding myself of that and surrounding myself with people who said, yeah, you're right, you do have that permission, I wouldn't be where I am today. And that's really how culture is created. And so what I'd love to do is our first exercise together. By show of hands, who here practices mindfulness? All right, awesome. So we've got maybe like 25, 30% of the group. Who's familiar with the concept of mindfulness? You've heard of mindfulness, you're aware. Okay, so there may be a few hands that weren't raised. For anybody, this is a new concept. Mindfulness is really the act of curiously investigating the present moment. So not thinking about what you didn't get done yesterday or what's on your to-do list for today, not running away in thoughts about things that aren't happening right now, but being able to really investigate this moment through all of your senses. When you are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, mindfulness is the remedy, always. Because when we can be in the present, we don't have to suffer anymore. We can be with ourselves. We can know that we're okay right now, because all we really have is the present moment. And so I'm going to guide you through a mindfulness practice. What I'm hoping is that this is something you can take with you and enjoy beyond our time together here. So meet yourself where you are. That's one of the things I always say. If you're like, I don't know what this lady's talking about and I'm kind of scared about this, that's okay. That's okay, it's totally fine. Meet yourself there and saying, I'm going to get curious. Okay? And if you're on the other side of the spectrum, you're like, yes, give me this mindfulness stuff. Excellent. You're exactly where you're meant to be, wherever you are in that. And so I'm going to, again, invite you. It's an invitation. You get to choose whether or not you accept. But the first invitation is for us to just take a moment to uncross your legs. Have your feet nice and flat on the floor. One of the best things that we can do is actually breathe in and out through our noses. When we start to breathe in and out through our nose, we actually activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our body that says into our mind, we are in rest and digest mode. We are not in fight or flight. So breathing in through the nose, sending it down to our belly, literally tells our body, we can relax now. We can relax now. So why don't we start by doing that? Just start to take, only if your passage is clear. I know there's a lot of springtime allergies happening right now. If you need to use your mouth, that's fine. Let's just start taking some deep breaths in and out of your nose, sending it down to your belly. If you want to gaze down or close your eyes, you can choose to do that. I actually encourage you to close your eyes because then you don't need to be distracted by anything else. But once again, it's an invitation for you to choose whether or not you accept. And I'm going to read each line of this Permission to Be Human pledge, and I'm going to ask you in the process to simply be mindful. Notice what comes up. Notice if one of these lines feels like an area of opportunity, or if one of these feels like something to honor and celebrate. So your only invitation right now is to simply notice as I recite the pledge. Let's do one more big breath together. In through the nose, down to the belly. And now you're invited to just notice. I promise to honor what makes me perfectly imperfect. I promise to meet myself where I am, not where I want to be. I promise to suspend judgment and ignite compassion. I promise to set healthy boundaries to protect my energy. I promise to prioritize my well-being by embodying my values. And in doing so, I promise to give myself and others permission to be human. Let's take another big breath in through the nose, down to the belly. And I invite you to just gently bring yourself back. Maybe you want to wiggle your fingers, your toes, roll your neck, your shoulders, whatever's going to just bring you back into the space together. And my first question for you, to turn to a partner, work in your group, go to another table, whatever feels right to you, is looking at this pledge, tuning in to the self-awareness that you just had the invitation to be with. Which one of these lines feels like your greatest area of opportunity to invest in for you? Not what anybody else thinks, but what you know inside of yourself. Which one of these areas is your greatest area of opportunity? And then, what does permission to be human mean to you? This is what it means to me, but you may have a different definition. And so we're just going to take a few minutes here. For those of you who are online, I welcome you to share this in the chat, to continue to be a part of the conversation. We're just going to take a few minutes here to meet with a partner and get clear, what's your greatest area of opportunity, and what does permission to be human mean to you? I know we could talk about this for a long time, and we're going to thread this through the entire rest of our experience together. And so what I want you to do now is write it down. Write down that area of opportunity, because as we continue in this conversation, we're going to revisit it. We're going to revisit it, and we're going to start to come up with some ways in which you can start to give yourself that permission to be human with more intention. Okay? So go ahead and write it down, which one of these lines. I'd love to know, a show of hands, how many people were in the boundaries? Who was in the boundaries field? Boundaries tends to be one of the highest. What about embodying your values? Not as much. What about perfectly imperfect? Yeah, honoring those pieces of ourselves. Yeah. And meeting yourself where you are? And then the last would be around the suspending judgment and igniting compassion. Yeah. I'm really good at judging myself. Anybody else excellent at that? Yeah, really great at it. It's having the mindful tools to be able to recognize when it's happening and then make a new choice. That's all that this is. It's all that this work is. Permission to be human is, instead of saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe I judge myself so much, right? You start judging yourself for judging yourself. Not very productive. But instead saying, oh, there I go, being a human, judging myself. Now I'm going to make a new choice. And it can be that simple, but it takes practice. It's a muscle. But when you yourself can do this, everyone around you starts to notice the shift and gets excited and wants to learn, what have you done? I can tell you that we have literally never done a single piece of advertising for the work that I do. It is 99% of people saying, I want what she has. I want to learn how to live that way. I want to create a culture where people love being there, the way that her people talk about it. And that's not me being braggadocious, but rather saying, you have this power too. We all have this power. This is the opportunity to say, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to choose that so that others can choose it. Just like the wellness room. You can choose it for yourself. And really, what does this all come down to, right? When we give ourselves permission to be human and therefore we extend it to those around us, what does that ultimately create? It ultimately creates our culture. And a lot of times we only think about culture as our work environment, but there's a culture inside of you on how you treat yourself. There's a culture in your home. There's a culture in your family. There's a culture in your communities you're a part of, and there's a really big culture at work. And a lot of times we just want people to get with the program, but we forget that they're humans too, and they've got a lot going on too. So the more we can share our humanity, the more we can create a culture of giving each other that permission to be human. And I know that we all have felt this before, right? This idea that our culture is only as strong as the worst behavior that's allowed, gossiped about, ignored. I cannot tell you how many times I have been a part of a team that was so successful. We were doing great stuff. And then a culture killer came in and wiped the whole thing out. And that's really, unfortunately, how we work as humans. We have a negativity bias. And things might be really, 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 really great, but then as soon as something feels like, oh, now that's the way we operate around here, or that person's getting away with that behavior, I guess that's okay, right? So if we're tolerating culture killers as just how it is, that's what we're saying the best that we can be. And again, the research and the data shows this, right? This cost. It's huge. I know you had sessions specifically on this today, right? On turnover. And look at the healthcare expenses associated to it. Deaths, right? It's very rare that we're actually talking about the fact that people die as a result of toxic workplace experiences. But it's really that serious. It's that serious. I terminated a contract with a group that I had a multi-year contract with because they weren't getting on board with the shifts. And one of the women I was coaching directly was so sick. She was so sick, but she had a deadline. She had a deadline. She had a deadline. She had a deadline. She ultimately, thank goodness, her husband forced her to go to the hospital. Her appendix was almost burst. Or no, excuse me, her appendix did burst. And it was seeping out into her body. If she had gotten to the hospital an hour later, she would have died. That's what the doctor told her. She had the surgery and then was super proud to have her laptop out and meet the deadline. Is that really what we're here to do? Is that really a people-first environment? That was one of the values this company said they had. And so we have to make choices. We've got to make big choices for ourselves first that then give others that permission to do the same. And when we make these choices and we say, we're not going to do that, right? We're going to have somebody else take over. We're going to give this person the space they need to recover. This is serious stuff, right? This is what happens. We see this incredible increase in growth. There is literally data showing that you make more profit, you have higher engagement, you have more retention. There's a win-win-win-win-win, but it's work. Because culture exists every day whether we do something about it or not. Every day. Just like the way we talk to ourselves. Just like the way we treat ourselves. It exists every day. And we can ignore it and hope it works itself out. Or we can put intentional energy towards it and make a positive impact as a result of saying, today's a new day. I'm going to do it this way now. And I might have some backslides. I might need some support, but I know I can choose better for myself first, which then ripples out to everyone around me. I call these culture killers and culture keepers within organizations. And probably just hearing that name, culture killer, culture keeper, without even seeing this list of slides, you probably already had an idea of who I was talking about. But before I get into this specifically, one of the things I always want to mention is that no matter how awesome you are, you have been a killer. You have been both of these things. We all have these qualities in us on our best days and on our worst days. We have this as a part of who we are. And so the intention of this slide is not to say, oh, let me label that person and let me label that person and I'm going to write them off and I'm going to give them a promotion, right? But rather, for you to start by looking inside yourself to say, honestly, what can I celebrate as it comes to the pieces of me that are a culture keeper? And what can I put intention towards in these areas where I have been a culture killer? And I'm going to start by telling you, I have been a culture killer with gossip. I came from an environment where gossip was what made you feel powerful, and it was a culture that really bred, the more information you shared, the more important you were, because you could be the one that could be in the inner circle, right, if you were willing to gossip. I'm seeing some heads nodding of like, yeah, I know this. That wasn't really who I was, but it was the culture that was created, so I became this person who talked about people in a way that I'm truly ashamed of. I cannot believe the conversations that I would have simply because that was what we did. Never did anybody say to me, have you talked to them about that directly? Because if you haven't, I can either spend some time helping you to learn how to form that conversation, I can help mediate that conversation, or we're just not going to have it. Because it's not then permeating a culture of gossip. We have to understand this, though, and we have to take ownership of it. You know, as HR executives and professionals, almost all the time people say, oh yeah, it's the CEO's job and the HR's job for creating the culture. Well, I'm here to let you off the hook and tell you that it's not. It's everyone's job. It's every single person who's there's job, because they're responsible for the energy they bring into that space, for the behaviors that they show up in, and for the accountability, and what I like to call loving accountability, of getting themselves back on track and having that support in the example I just gave with another way you could respond to gossip. I'm sorry you're going through that. Have you had a conversation with them about it? Would you like help in how to do that? Because it's really not helpful if we just keep talking about it and not make a change. See the difference? All right, so just like before, I'm going to ask you now to take a moment, look at both of these sides. If it would be helpful for me to go back to the other slide, let me know for the size of the text. But what do you want to celebrate? What can you celebrate? This is the thing, we often always focus on what can we do better. I want you to take a minute to be like, I am awesome when it comes to identifying issues and presenting solutions. I'm awesome at that, right? And then I want you to have one area of opportunity when it comes to the culture killer side. Just one of each. Everybody got that? Would you like me to go back to the other slide that is bigger text? Okay. So we're just picking one from each side, doing a personal reflection first, and then you are going to go back with a partner. It can be the same one, somebody different, your choice, in sharing what came up for you. And once again, this is an invitation to meet yourself where you are. If you're only comfortable sharing where you're a keeper, totally fine. Totally fine. This is not about like going to a place that you don't want to go to, but rather meeting yourself where you are and having the opportunity to have some self-awareness. You get to choose whether you share that with others. Okay? So we're just going to take a few minutes here. All right. So I'd love to invite one or two folks to celebrate. Celebrate what you do really well when it comes to being a culture keeper. And the reason that I say this is because it can often be more vulnerable to celebrate what you're good at than it is to say what you need to improve on. It's amazing for those of us who are big self-judgers, like myself. I'm perfectly fine to tell you all the ways that I need to improve. But it can be really uncomfortable to say, you know what, I really rock at that. And I'm going to own that about myself. So in giving ourselves permission to be human, it's not just about identifying where we can give ourselves a break, because we are humans too. But it's also about honoring our humanity that makes us awesome, that makes us awesome. So I want to hear from one or two people, what makes you awesome as a culture keeper? What makes you awesome as a culture keeper? Who's going to kick us off? Go ahead, yes.
Identifies issues and presents solutions. Love creating new ideas and have we tried it this way or can we do it that way? That's totally where I rock. Like,
Amazing. I love that. What's your name? Melinda. Melinda is awesome at identifying issues and presenting solution, and she rocks at it. She just said that. I rock at that. And that is like really something to own. Not everyone does that. I cannot tell you how many companies I work with where they're trying to change that culture. People are very willing to drop off a problem at your front door and walk away and say, hope you figure that out. So the fact that you're that kind of a person means that you're creating that kind of environment and culture around you. So thank you for being that kind of person. Who else? Who else? I can't tell if that was a slight hand, but I'm going to call on you because it was like, yes. What are you awesome at?
everything.
Aww.
Well, it's so funny when you said that it's more vulnerable to talk about your strengths. I'm exactly like you. I can tell you all day long that the only time I'll probably say the stuff that I'm amazing is in interview. Otherwise, I hate.
All right, this is an interview.
Yeah.
What are you awesome at?
Really? I'm like the worst person. But anyway, I don't know if she mentioned the, I'm on, you were talking about like problem identifiers, but that's it. They're great at problem identification, but they do nothing about it. So, very good at problem identification, but always coming with solutions.
Yes, we got another person who's awesome at identifying solutions. What's your name? Lori. That is awesome, Lori. That's great. And it's something to honor and celebrate. I can even tell that you're like, I don't even know if I want to say this, right? And Lori, I say that to you with love because I am you. I know that feeling. I had to do this exercise. Actually, Lori Raggio, who is, I know, tuning in, she did this exercise with me where she said, I needed to ask people, I think it was like 10 people, what do I bring into the room when I enter? Or what enters with me when I come into a room? And ideally, you needed to ask people in person, and that was one of the most vulnerable things I've ever done. Because I'm really comfortable asking people to tell me where I could be better, but it can be hard to actually be present with how awesome you are. And so I invite, this is the next invitation for self-awareness, in where can you honor yourself more? Own it as your gift instead of, some people may think this about me. But own that about yourself because when you do, that is the ripple effect of what you create for everyone around you. It's like, oh, look at how confident she is and how she owns her solutions. Maybe I could be that confident, right? And the same for the areas of opportunity. When we can honestly say, the way that I just said, I gossiped, right? That shows our humanity. That says, I've made mistakes too. And we can do something about that now that we have that awareness, and we can own those pieces of ourselves too. So what I want you to write down, if you haven't written down yet, is specifically the area that you want to improve on, because again, we're going to weave this in. So far you've written down your area of the pledge that you want to invest more energy in, and now you're going to write down the area of being a culture killer that you would like to invest more energy in shifting, or an area of a culture keeper that you want to do more of. Okay? So just write it down. And when it comes to our cultures, we are all a walking, talking, living, breathing set of values. And so are our companies. But very few of us actually take the time to acknowledge and honor that about our human experience. So if I have a core value of authenticity, but I go into a workplace where I feel like I can't be authentic, that's a disconnect. That's a misalignment of personal core values with the core values of the organization. And when we think about culture in general, this is the formula I use. I got this from Simon Sinek, for anybody who's a Simon Sinek fan out there, which is values times behavior equals culture. It's that simple, and it's that complex. So, say you have a value of integrity. It's a pretty common core value. But then the behavior is either in or out of alignment, right? So if it's in alignment, if you had integrity, you'd be communicating transparently, right? People would understand what's going on. And what kind of culture does that create as a result? It creates these intrinsically motivated people. Folks are engaged, they're reliable, because there's integrity. That's real. It's not a poster on the wall. It's not something you heard about from the website when you applied to the job and never heard about it ever again. Then on the other side, what about when our behaviors are taking away from that value? Like a lack of communication. What kind of culture does that breed? It's the opposite, right? You feel unmotivated, disengaged, unreliable, because so many times people say, well, why do I have to do it? Nobody else is doing it around here. Nobody else communicates, so why should I? Right? That's just part of our human experience. We start to get into those ways of being. I have a client who has been awesome with their communication throughout this whole pandemic. They've been amazing. And then, I know this is a hot topic right now, we were doing a bunch of pulse checking surveys to see how people were feeling about coming back into the office or not coming back in and what they needed to feel safe. And I'm sure many of you have gone through this process probably many, many, many times at this point. And so all of the communications back from employees were saying we need hybrid. Some people don't actually want to come back at all, but certainly don't want everybody coming back. That's what everything showed. All of these pulse checks were showing that. And then when the survey results came back, the CEO said, we're not sharing those with anyone and we're coming back to the office. What was the point in asking? The integrity was gone like that. And this is a place that has extraordinary loyalty. People who, on average, have worked there 20, 30 years. And people are leaving because they felt like there's no integrity here when you ask me something and you don't honor it. Don't ask me in the first place if you really don't care. Or if you're going to keep this information to yourself and hope that nobody finds out because you know people are talking to each other about it. And this is the difference between values that are a poster on the wall and values that are lived in your behaviors, your actions, your policies, how you hire, how you fire, how you determine what your one-on-ones look like, how you determine who gets to be a part of leading different experiences, and who gets the opportunity to be held accountable in a way that they can do better for themselves and everyone around them. And values are really this beautiful thing. People often ask me, how did you get so passionate about values? And the truth is, I'm actually not that passionate about values. I'm passionate about what values unlock. Values unlock emotional intelligence within us that you didn't have access to before. A lot of times people feel they need to go through really rigorous EQ programs, and those things are wonderful. I'm not saying anything against that. But what I love about values what I am passionate about values, is that as soon as you start asking people about them, and you start to relate them to whether feel like you're filled with energy and being brought to life, or you feel like you're being sucked dry and drained, we know the difference. We know the difference. And so then people can start to say, oh, the reason that was so draining is because one of my core values is connection and I didn't feel any connection there. Or the reason I loved that experience is because one of my core values is sense of belonging and I felt like I had a room of new best friends. The difference is in your energy. Your energy tells you whether or not your values are being activated or they're being violated. And that's what they can do when we intentionally bring people into our cultures who are actually intrinsically motivated by those things. Since values live inside of us, we cannot say, you need to be motivated by innovation because I said so. You can put on a good show, perhaps, if that's an expectation of you. But if you're not actually intrinsically motivated by innovation, probably not the best job for you, if that's a core value of the organization and what's expected of you. So these are conversations that we need to learn how to be able to articulate and begin to understand, again, starting with ourselves. Starting with ourselves. So that you can go through the experience of saying, oh, you know, this core value of ours, I feel like we're doing a great job in living that in these ways that I'm aware of because I'm a part of that. And here's places that we have opportunities. And I'm aware of that because I'm a part of that too. Right? Our values give us that feedback. And so this last exercise that we're going to do together is really around starting with your core values. This is the kind of thing where literally I do multi-day retreats on this. I've been leading values work for almost a decade now, and there's never an end. There's never like, check, done the values work. There's always something more to uncover. There's always something more to learn from. There's always a new nuance or a place where these can be operationalized within yourself, within your teams, and within your organization. You never run out. And so the values that are up here, this is just a sort of a random list of values. It comes from the Schwartz value scale. I got as many up here that I was hoping you could see with this font. There's clearly way more than values of this that exist in the world. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is looking back at what you wrote down, where you want to put more energy towards. What core value could serve you in doing that? Okay? So for example, if I said that one of the areas of opportunity for myself was with gossiping, maybe the core value that I want to ground in is honesty. Because that's what it means to me to stop doing that. It means that I would honestly go speak to that person directly. Again, this is my interpretation. You might say, honesty, that doesn't make any sense. Because you're a different person and you have a different definition of that value. So the exercise here is not just like, oh, pick a word off the list. But rather, this is a prompt to get you started. Maybe your word's not on here. Maybe your value's not on here. Maybe it's totally separate from this. All the values that are in capitalized are CHRA values. Just make a little connection back. And I trust that there's one value on here that is something that, let's say, it really intrinsically motivates you, right? Somebody doesn't have to tell you that doing this is going to be good for you. You know that when you do this, when you activate this part of you, you feel good, right? So just take a moment now to write down one. I know it can be really tempting to like pick 25. One. What is one core value? One. Whether it's on this list or in your heart, that could directly be a response to what your areas of opportunity are, where you want to put more energy towards. Is this making sense? Does anybody have questions about this? Okay, so we're just going to take a minute here. It's okay if you're like not 100% sure, go with the best, the closest thing to what you believe it is, because here's the deal, with all these exercises today, you can do it as many times as you want after this. And the book is going to give you so many more exercises to experience too. So once you have your one value written down, let me know by just giving me a thumbs up so I know we're ready to move on. Okay. All right, we're just going to take about 30 more seconds. If you're not 100% on it, it's okay. You can choose one simply for this exercise, and then maybe after the exercise you'll say, oh, you know, I want to redo that with this other value now that I have it seeped in a little bit more. All right, can I get like a big thumbs up like this, like over above your head if you're done, if you're ready? Okay, looks like we got the majority of folks. If you're still going, that's okay, keep going. That's about meeting yourself where you are. If you want a little bit more time, you can take that for yourself, okay? But what I'm going to lead you now is in our second mindfulness practice, where once again we're going to go inside, we're going to go within ourselves to find some answers, if this to you earlier felt like this was not your jam, this is another invitation to see if it might be. This also is about meeting yourself where you are. So if closing your eyes doesn't feel good to you, that's okay. But I promise you, you're going to get more when you don't have the distractions of all the other sensations that come. So let's just start, like, once again, uncrossing your legs if they're crossed, uncrossing your arms if they're crossed, really feeling your feet on the floor. And just like before, we're going to breathe in through our nose, really feeling it go down to our belly, feeling our belly expand and contract. And this time, we're going to use these two affirmations just to get us started into the practice. And this, I promise you, I do this every single day, at least 5 minutes a day, if not more than that. This is a wonderful reactive and proactive tool that you can take with you and teach others. And it's the simple practice of when you take an inhale, you repeat to yourself, I breathe in peace. And when you exhale, you repeat to yourself, I breathe out stress. And my invitation, if you want to take it to the next step, is to actually start to visualize the stress leaving your body, start to feel your shoulders drop, start to feel the muscles around your face soften. And really also feeling the peace that exists in this present moment that you can breathe in. The gift of our breath is that we can only breathe in the present, not in the past and not in the future. So whenever we're feeling out of control or in a spiral or feeling anxiety, all we need to do is return to our breath and we get anchored in the present. So let's do that together now. Begin with a big inhale in, repeating in your mind, I breathe in peace. And that big exhale out, I breathe out stress. I breathe in peace. I breathe out stress. I breathe in peace. I breathe out stress. Just repeat that to yourself as many times as it serves you. And now just notice where you can maybe drop your shoulders a little bit. Maybe soften around your forehead and your eyes. So really allowing yourself to feel the peace that exists in this present moment. And from this place of stillness, I now invite you to bring into your mind that core value you identified. What was that core value that you identified for yourself just a moment ago? And ask yourself, what does this value mean to me? How do I define it? Not what Google says or what somebody else's opinion is, but what does this core value mean to me? And now from your definition, what is one promise you can make to yourself to embody this value? To really live this way? What's the first baby step? The kindest thing you can do that's meeting yourself where you are today? What's a promise you might make to yourself in living that value? Now I want to have you see yourself now activating that value, visualize, just like Olympians do. Really visualize yourself living this out, seeing this promise through as if it's happening right now. Doesn't matter what's going on with anyone else. This is just about you. No one needs to give you any permission or validation in order to keep this promise. Only you can. To close us out in this practice, I'm going to ring a chime, and I invite you to take one final really big, deep inhale in and a really big exhale out through the sound of the chime. Really pulling in that peace and releasing anything that may be lingering that's not in alignment with this value. And once again, whenever you're ready, you can slowly bring yourself back. And I'm going to ask you to go straight to pen to paper. No talking now. Straight to pen to paper. What came up for you? What was the value that you chose? How did you define it? And what's a promise? What's a promise that you can keep? Much like the promises we started off with in the pledge. What's a promise you might be able to keep that will directly impact those areas you identified that you want to invest more energy in? It's okay if you don't remember everything. Just write down what you do remember. This is how we go from values as a nice idea to values as an intentional behavior. And once you've gotten it down, you can once again meet with your partner, your table, and share at whatever level you're comfortable in what came up for you. When we share things with others, we begin the accountable process. We begin to say, this is a thing I want to own. Can you witness that for me? Can you witness that with me? Could we be accountability buddies? For those joining online, I encourage you to keep using the chat, sharing what feels right. All right, I want to make sure that I land this plane on time today. I'd love, actually, before we get into the next step, who's willing to just shout out what value they selected for themselves? Just shout out. What value did you select? Self-discipline. Self-discipline. Self-care? Self-respect. Self-respect. Purpose. Spiritual life. What else? What other values were selected? Don't leave me hanging. Unity with nature. Yes, that's my top core value. I'm on a quest to become a cowgirl. These boots are not for show. All right, beautiful. The key here is that it's yours. Values are yours. I worked with a woman who came to our values retreat, and then I did some coaching with her afterwards. And one of the things, I mentioned this quest to become a cowgirl. One of the things that I'm truly on a quest on is that my family has a ranch in Idaho that's 100 acres of land. I am a cowgirl in training, literally. I move cattle across the mountainside through the rivers, and I train horses here. I'm about to go into an equine therapy certification program, and our vision, my husband and I's vision, is to open a boutique retreat center in this beautiful sacred space. And I talk about this a lot. And I go on these solo retreats a lot that are totally off the grid. And this woman who came through this work with us, she was like, I really want to do the solo retreat. You've inspired me to do a solo retreat. So she went on this solo retreat. She said it was everything she possibly thought it could be and so much more than that. And when she came home, her house had been burglarized, and the folks who did it left all the water running, so it was flooded also. All of her family heirlooms and journals that she had kept for her life were ruined and taken. And I save this email, and I actually read it whenever I need the reminder, because what she said was, normally, coming home to something like this, I would have lost myself. But what happened was that I was so grounded in my values that I knew no one could take them from me. And that's what I'm on a quest to help other people do. To understand that no one can take your values from you, only you. We allow people to violate them. We allow ourselves to constantly be out of alignment because we don't take the time to learn who we really are and then to choose who we really are on purpose. And so if this resonated with you today, this is the first step. You started by checking in with yourself. You can do these exact exercises with your team and a heck of a lot more that are in the book. And then you can expand those out into your community at large. And nobody can take them from you. You are the keeper when you choose to step up in this opportunity. And again, for folks who are like, I want to go a little bit deeper. This is something that we formerly only had available for folks who came to our retreats. But this is a free values profile now that anybody can have access to. You are welcome to share this with your teams, beyond this, with your loved ones, right? And it'll get you a step further than where we were today. It'll get you another step further. Because once we really know what our values are, that's just like the first baby step. First baby step is know your values. The second is to own them. That's when we did the defining. Because it's how am I going to own this? What does this mean to me? And then when we do this in a culture, we find a collective definition that we all agree upon, right? In an organization at large. So you know your values, you own your values, and then you live them. And it really doesn't have to be that hard. It's just a choice. But we need to surround ourselves with people and experiences that give us permission to be human. And that starts with you, giving yourself that permission. So I thank you so much for going on this journey with me this afternoon, for being willing to be a little vulnerable in these processes. I know that there's a big spectrum of what's comfortable and uncomfortable. And I'm just so grateful that y'all were willing to go there, because that's the first step. And I hope that, again, if you feel called, you'll see what else might be possible for you, as there's so much more in the book as well of opportunities to do that. I'm going to be outside at a table for anybody who wants their book signed. And I think I have some time for questions. Yeah, we've got some time for questions if anybody has specific questions they'd like answered.
Raise your hand real high if you have a question. I do have one from online regarding changing the culture of nonprofits. How do you apply what we talked about today to that?
It's exactly the same. It's not separate for a different type of organization. So my background is in social work and nonprofit management. I've only worked in nonprofits before I started my own business. There's no different. I think that's actually where we start to trip ourselves up a little bit when we say it has to be done differently because it's, a government or a corporation or a nonprofit. But the truth is, it has to be done the way that resonates with you and your people. Not everyone is going to have this as something that makes them come alive because it doesn't activate their values. But the process and what's outlined in the book is for across the board, irregardless of what industry you come from.
Any other questions?
This is my favorite part. I really like getting juicy, difficult questions.
Yeah, hit her with your best shot. All right, well, if you do have any questions, going once, going twice. All right, if you do have any questions, be sure to engage on the Whova app. MaryBeth would be happy to answer those questions for you on there. You can talk to her after the presentation as well. And like she said, she will be out front signing her book. So one more time for MaryBeth Hyland. A program that we definitely all need. So thank you for sharing that with us here today.
Yeah,
are you based out of Idaho?
No, I'm in
okay.
Federal Hill in Baltimore.
Okay.
We just bought our 200 square foot tiny home.
Okay.
And we'll begin our off-the-grid transition in July. But we'll be living back and forth from Baltimore to Idaho.
All right, awesome. An untraditional lifestyle, but we can all learn from that. So one more time for MaryBeth. Again, virtual attendees, you will get a copy mailed to you if you have not already. Real quick, by a show of hands, is this anybody's first CHRA event? Okay, put them up high. Round of applause for new attendees. Awesome. And one more time for our sponsors today, Amazon Care, Chesapeake Search Partners, PSA Financial, Burn Along, the Nanny Network, First Financial Federal Credit Union, Atlantic Financial Federal Credit Union, Spectacle Talent Partners, SECU, Better Fits. One more time for all of them for donating their time here today. Most importantly, thank you to the volunteers. They've been working hard for you all day with a flashing lanyard, so make sure you thank them on your way out the door. Show them a round of appreciation. Without them, things like this wouldn't happen. And of course, thank you to Martins West for having us here today. Didn't they do an awesome job? All right, one more time for them. A few questions on the way out the door that really stuck with me today. a few questions, including, do I give energy or do I take it away? These are great questions to ask ourselves as we go through this week, and great questions that we can take action on after today's conference. What do people think when they think of your brand? How do I define my core value? What are you hearing from your employees? And do your people feel like they belong? These are all questions that kind of tie into each one of these programs. So make sure if you missed anything to check it out on the Whova app. Engage on there. Those videos will be available for 30 more days. Other than that, I think we've knocked it out of the park. So one time for yourselves. Get home safe this evening. I've been David Horning, and next time my PowerPoint will work.